Wrestling or grappling is one of the oldest and most prevalent sports known to man. Like boxing, wrestling was featured in the original Greek Olympics during the 6th century BCE. Essentially, wrestling is a solo combat sport that consists of techniques including clinches, takedowns, pins, and joint manipulations. For much of history, wrestling in one form or another appears in religious traditions and literature. It is often used to represent a struggle with oneself or on a cosmic plane. In chapter 32 of Genesis in the Bible, Jacob wrestles with an angel. Additionally, Greek mythology is filled with the grappling exploits of Zeus and Hercules, among others. Even the Muslim prophet Muhammad is described in an 8th century biography as a skilled wrestler. Just as wrestling has a rich history, the variations of grappling found around the world represent a mosaic of traditions and techniques. Different forms of wrestling can be found, from a mud pit in India to a private club in England to the middle school gym of suburban Ohio. To contextualize this vast array, it is necessary to briefly mention some of the forms of wrestling most commonly practiced. Collegiate or folk-style wrestling. Collegiate wrestling is a competitive form of grappling practiced in high school and colleges across America. It developed out of the various forms of catch-as-catch-can and collar and elbow styles of wrestling that became popular in the United States during the 18th and 19th centuries. The duration of a match is divided into 3 periods with a possible overtime. The match will generally last anywhere from 4.5 to 7 minutes, depending upon the level of competition. The scoring system is based on takedowns, turns, reversals, and escapes. The ultimate goal of the match is to pin your opponent's shoulders to the mat. Freestyle wrestling. Freestyle wrestling is one of the 2 styles of wrestling currently featured in the Olympic Games. Like collegiate wrestling, freestyle grew out of the catch-as-catch-can style of grappling. Unlike collegiate wrestling, freestyle wrestling is practiced internationally. The point system in freestyle wrestling is based on takedowns, back exposures, reversals, and penalties. Greco-Roman wrestling. Greco-Roman wrestling is currently featured in the Olympics and, as such, is considered an international style of wrestling. The unique feature separating Greco-Roman from freestyle wrestling is the prohibition of any activity using the legs. In Greco-Roman wrestling, participants are not allowed to engage or use the legs for offensive or defensive techniques. Sambo. Sambo is a martial art that was invented in Russia during the 20th century. Specifically, it was developed as the hand-to-hand combat system of the Red Army during the 1920s. Sambo can refer either to combat sambo or sport sambo. Combat sambo is a hybrid martial art used by Russian military, law enforcement, and special forces as their preferred form of unarmed combat. Combat sambo uses an amalgam of striking and grappling techniques to quickly subdue the potential assailant, and it also includes techniques to disarm the weapon-wielding attacker. Sport sambo is a grappling art refined for competitive pursuits. Essentially, sport sambo is a fusion of freestyle wrestling and judo. However, unlike judo, leg locks are allowed, but chokes are not. In fact, sambo practitioners are well known for their proficiency with leg locks. Some of the sambo practitioners who have used sambo techniques successfully in MMA include Oleg, the Russian Bear Takhtarov, Fedor Emelianenko, and Andrei Arlovsky. Submission grappling. Submission grappling has grown in popularity along with the rise of MMA. Part of the popularity can be attributed to the Abu Dhabi Combat Club Submission Wrestling World Championships. This event draws some of the biggest names from the worlds of competitive grappling and MMA. The techniques of submission grappling include elements of no-gi Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and wrestling. Some argue that submission grappling's roots lie in the old catch wrestling style of the 19th century American carnival wrestlers who traveled the country and took on all comers. Occasionally, these grapplers would come across a farmhand or country boy who could actually wrestle. In these instances, the carnival wrestlers would use a hook or submission to defeat their skilled opponent. Lately, movements have begun with the intention of preserving the techniques and history of catch wrestling as a way to prevent the extinction of this art. Wrestling and MMA. The initial success of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in early MMA shows caused a lot of attention to be turned toward BJJ techniques. However, in the early days of MMA, BJJ eventually had to share some of its spotlight with wrestling. The success of wrestlers like Dan Severn, Mark Kerr, and Mark Coleman caused a number of pundits to praise the applicability of wrestling to MMA. In particular, wrestlers became known for their ground and pound style. This term described the wrestler's tendency to take his opponent down, maintain a strong top position, and attempt to strike or pound him into submission. This approach was in contrast to the BJJ practitioners, who used strangulations and joint manipulations from either the top or bottom position to win the conflict. Eventually, the rather limited approach of ground and pound became increasingly inefficient. MMA fighters have begun to cross-train, and many became able to prevent the wrestler from implementing his game. Nonetheless, many wrestlers have been able to evolve with the sport of MMA. The wrestlers who continue to be successful in making the transition into MMA are those who are able to use their takedown ability, ground control, explosive strength, and mental toughness alongside the other elements necessary for MMA, that is, submission, striking, MMA-specific conditioning. In particular, the takedown aspect of wrestling has been incorporated into the hybrid style of MMA fighting. For an individual to execute wrestling techniques with a high degree of success, it is necessary to be in top all-around physical condition. However, certain muscle groups are especially important for wrestling. One such muscle group is the lower back. A strong lower back is crucial for completing takedowns and throws. It also helps transitions between grappling on the feet and on the mat. Additionally, much like in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, many wrestling techniques are based on pulling movements. This pulling movement can be seen in grabbing a leg, locking the upper body, and arm drags. Therefore, exercises that mimic the pulling movements in wrestling have a direct transference into the application of common grappling techniques. Lastly, a strong neck is important for a wrestler for a number of reasons. From a defensive perspective, a strong neck can provide a good bridge to avoid getting pinned and can reduce your opponent's ability to control your head in a tie-up. From an offensive perspective, a powerful neck will help a wrestler establish good position in a head fight, and it can be an important tool in completing takedowns. Specifically, when quality wrestlers shoot for a takedown, they position their heads in the ribs as a way to unbalance their opponent and separated the targeted leg or legs from the main body. A strong neck improves the power of the strategic head position. To train your neck, click on the link below for our book, Tactical Shield Training. Also check out the link for our book, Grapple Strong.